Welcome to Maker's Perspective. Here I'm going to be making a bowl with a drop of solid foot. As with the pieces in the previous parts of this series, I start with one gather and make a small bubble. For bowls, plates, and spheres, the only time I will use the marver is for the starter bubble.
My time. Everything's my time.
There is an exception when I make a cylinder and turn that into a bowl. I make it that way so that I have a nice ring on the bottom of the bowl. The ring is the foot. But for this one, or for a bowl that doesn't have that type of foot, I don't marver them.
It used to be, oh, I gotta get back on the road by 3 because traffic's gonna get bad on 64. No, no. It's nap time. He like doesn't mind it anymore. Like it's time to go nap with the cat. It's okay. To wait for nap time. He naps around 3 to 4. But then they stay up until 2 a.m. Yeah. Jeez. My parents have turned into college kids. What are they doing until 2 a.m.? Watching Yellowstone. Yeah, with Bosch. I like Bosch. Yellowstone, I don't know, you gotta love it. My dad literally started growing the mustache because of Yellowstone. Ready to take somebody to the train yard? The train station.
For my second gather, I go to the depth of the gather line from the first bubble. Once in the furnace, I make sure I have 2 good revolutions and then gradually come down, all while turning and keeping the bubble on center. Once out, I have a nice homogeneous gather of glass on my pipe. I'm a big advocate for cooling a pipe. That way my mitts are nice and comfortable when they're turning. Once back at the bench, the block will touch the glass from the top of the moil all the way to the bottom. You can see that this doesn't take long, especially if you have a nice even gather. Again, I always like to reheat the piece. That way, if for some reason there is a little anomaly, cold, slightly off center, etc., this is the time I can really make sure that it's all good. Another quick block and a little air. Little stretch as well. Remember, anytime the glass doesn't do what you want, as far as when you're blowing it out, how it blows out, etc., just go back in and heat. You can manipulate it and make it happen later. I'm still blocking the whole piece and letting it stretch a little bit as I go back in for a heat. Remember, the only way to thin it out is to stretch it or inflate it. So I go back into heat so I can stretch it out and inflate it more. A little bit of stretch, then cooling the bottom with the paddle side of the jacks and some inflation. Now jacking, you can see how the blades are used to support the lower part of the shoulder, and how my hand is over the pipe and not over the piece. Therefore, I'm supporting the piece and keeping my hand cool. This part of the process, the jack line and such, as well as the original inflation, have all been demonstrated in the previous videos. So now, because of timing, I'll put on the first person cam. Right now, I have a sphere, but by heating it, then holding it up, capping it, and giving a good spin, I can squat that sphere. Here I am, holding it up and squatting it. You can also see that my jack line isn't jacked down all the way. Pulling out on the shoulder a little bit. And you can also see that I have a nice little bit of thickness on the bottom.
Hello? Stop.
I'm going to go in for one more heat to squat it up just a bit more. My final squat. You can see that there's no real hard edges, maybe a little bit on the jack line where the shoulder is. For the most part, the bottom of the bowl is a nice lozenge shape, almost a third of the sphere. Much like a punty, when I place a solid foot on, I like to have a marker. That way, I know how to hit center. So by putting 2 rings, I have a bit of a bullseye. When I take the foot, I can then know how to twist, how to turn, bring the piece and pipe to me, or to the right and left while I drop the solid gather on my bowl. JW is getting his second dip. 2 small dips.
I'm just gonna move it to my nose. It's not like I'm...
One right after another. I have the pipe on my foot, I line it up, and you can see I'm slightly turning, twisting, and then angle a bit to cut. Sit and I grab my taglio, kind of pat it on, and then I push fairly hard and use centrifugal force to spread it out. My tag is now on the bottom side of the foot, and JW's paddle is on the bottom. I have a nice foot. This foot also has a ledge. It actually has a bit of a ring or a rim to it. I like this because when you're punting the center, the piece doesn't need to be ground. It just sits flat on that ring. Having the ring is a pro move. Not having the ring, not so much. You can see everything's fairly on center. Again, here I'm just going to be torching the jack line and flash the piece deeply. Remember when flashing, it's go past that first burner. And before you punty, it's good to have a little movement at the jack line. One other thing I do with a bowl is I use a bigger punty. What I mean by that is the circumference of the actual rod. That will make it easier to turn, and your elbow will thank you in the end.
That should be good.
Just touch it on. As you turn, you can push a little bit more. One blade on the bottom, one blade on the top of the punty, making sure it's fairly close to center. A drop of water on the moil, and then a little drop right on the neckline. And a bonk, and now JW has to flash it. I drop that water on the moil so that I don't make a mess on the jack line. I can just get that nice precise drop. To center this, I just use a paddle. With a paddle, I lift up on the lip, but we can also use the leverage of the bowl's foot. I find the high spot, flip it over 180, and lift up on the foot. To further confirm straight, I just ride the paddle on the edge of the foot. If it doesn't move, you're golden. Now I just need to open up the lip a little bit for a lip wrap. Again, for bowls, I try not to trim them. I don't tweeze them out. My theory is it's going to widen out just like a plate, so there's no reason to thin it out, as it will happen in the process. So that I can add the lip wrap, I'm just going to take the paddle into my jacks, make sure the lip is nice and straight, and then just slightly open it just a little bit. I want a nice uniform flat, round opening. JW is coming over with a fresh gather he's gathered, kind of like an Evolia. It will feed off the stick and onto the lip. Touch on just the tip, and then I go 3 times around the lip. Just a nice coil. Once coiled on, I'll go back in and I'll flash the whole piece. When I come back to the pinch, I'm going to go on the sides with the jack blades. I'm on the lip and then have JW paddle the lip, making sure my lip wrap is nice and straight.
Good.
If there's some anomaly or something funny, this is also a time where I could trim and make the lip wrap uniform. Now this is also an area where sometimes people, after this heat, will Sophie. Again, on bowls and plates, it's going to get spun out, and if you open it right, there's no real need to inflate it here. At this point, I'm just using the jacks to open it up a little bit, just enough so that I can get my parchofis in. I grab my parchofis and give them a good shake and place them on the bench. When using them, I'll go to the back of the bowl to find that colder area and then from there I'll start pushing against the glass and opening up the piece, following the contour and gradually almost kneading it open.
On the back.
Taking the trophies, going to the back and gradually going to the front.
Switch bottom. Yeah, there you go.
Once I've done that, and if I need a little bit more force, I can push down, like I'm doing now. Really, if anybody wants to know how to make a bowl, then watch a very good ceramicist throw one. The way they push and knead it is the exact same thing you're doing here, just instead a different axis of orientation. Also remember, every time I use my parchopes, I rotate them. That way they burn in nice and evenly. There's nothing worse than when you have one stick longer than the other.
On the back.
So here I am going in, finding the cooler spot, and then gradually opening up and lifting off as I go to the lip.
Great.
I open the jacks or the chopes a little bit wider each time. Another thing you can see is I generally don't heat a bowl so that I'm parallel to the ground. I kind of raise it up a little bit so it squats back in the glory hole. Going in with a churros,
On back, on top.
not sitting in the same spot but gradually following the whole contour of the bowl. Now watching this, I think I goofed a little bit. I probably should not have opened it up as much as I had. The lip is just a little bit wider than I'd like at this point. But it'll still turn into an alright bowl.
On the back.
JW is on the back, stabilizing the foot, and then once I get to a certain point and I've pushed the bowl back enough with a chose, he'll come on the top. Basically sandwiching it to make sure that it's nice and parallel.
You got it. You prefer right or left?
Right, always. I don't like doing the fucking dance around the glory hole bullshit.
One more good shape with the trophies, trying to push that back, make that nice curve in the back that is a good look for a bowl. And then coming all the way to the lip.
Heat up those jacks. Hold on. Let me see. Yeah, if I don't need
It's
it,
about done, and it just needs a little bit of fine tuning. So I usually use either the jacks or the paper for these parts. I come on from the outside, give it a good spin, and kind of follow the curve and freeze up that outside,
up top.
while JW runs the jacks on the back and the top. My hat cam died, so now you have to deal with over the shoulder view.
That's about it.
It's always good just to stop and inspect it. And sometimes I find that the paper is good to use here. I can kind of get in some nooks and crannies, use part of the paper's support on the foot, and then follow the curve of the rest of the piece.
On the back.
A softer take than using the hard edges of the jacks or the wood of the trophies. With a paper, it's the closest I can get to throwing the piece, similar to ceramics. Well, I'm done, but I believe I pulled out the bottom just a bit. Even though it doesn't really affect the whole bowl because it's just a little bit in the solid foot, I'm still going to torch it and heat it and try to let it sink back a little bit. That way the piece will sit nicely on the intended ledge or ring on the bottom of the foot. You can see that in the picture at the end. Just to ensure that it's back, I take my paddle and give it a push on the lip. Make sure everything is nice and straight. A drop of water on the connection, a tap, and then just a torch to make sure that there's no sharp edges on the punty. And there you have it, a bowl with a solid foot. A bowl to put your chips, your dip, your ice cream, your cereal, or whatever you desire to feast. Thanks for watching Maker's Perspective.